Welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Steve Novick, a member of City Club's Forum Board and producer of today's program. For more than a century, the City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have come together to find solutions to our region's biggest challenges. We've gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel and are joined by thousands of people via X-Ray FM and its radio stations at 107.1 and 91.1 FM, KGW's website, Facebook feed and news app, and Open Signal's community media television stations. We are incredibly grateful for all the work they do to bring Friday Forum to our community. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our sponsors, volunteers, and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs week after week after week. I'd like to thank AARP, Oregon, Avangrid Renewables, and SEAU 49 for their generous support of this and all our Friday Forums this fall. I also want to give a shout out to the folks from our Environmental Issues Forum who are here today. Also, City Club is proud to offer a Civic Scholars program where we're bring area high school students to be part of our civic dialogue at Friday Forum. Today's Civic Scholars are from Roosevelt High School, home of the Rough Riders. These students met with our moderator in advance of today's program and will be given the opportunity to ask the first question today during our public Q&A. We're glad you're here to take part in this debate about the future of Portland. Please join me in showing our appreciation to everyone who's made this event possible. I am thrilled that we get the opportunity to debate Measure 26201 today, which is more commonly known as the Portland Clean Energy Initiative. Hopefully, we all agree that we should do something about climate disruption, and there's some folks here who are trying to do that. But is this the right way for us to go about approaching climate disruption in Portland? Here to address your questions about Measure 26201 are 4 people with strong views on this issue. 4 people. There's nothing like a good doubles match. And this promises to be the City Club equivalent of the young Martina Navratilova and Pam Shriver against the Williams sisters. Joining us on the yes side are Tony DeFalco, the executive director at Verde, and Jenny Lee, advocacy director for the Coalition of Communities of Color. On the no side are Andrew Hone, the president and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, and Andrew hails from Wisconsin, and I've told him that no matter what side we're on in this measure, all God-fearing Oregonians are rooting for his Brewers to beat LA. And we also have Eric Fruits, the president of Economics International Corporation. And Eric, you need to know, they're not booing, they're going, fruits, fruits. At the end of today's debate, a representative of City Club's research committee that looked into 26201 will come to the lectern to share her committee's findings. But first, it's time for the debate. Moderating today's program is Roberta Phillip Robbins, chair of the Oregon Council on Civil Rights and board chair of Metropolitan Public Defenders. She has served as a public school science teacher, policy advisor in local government, and as executive director of a philanthropic foundation. She is also the founder and CEO of Green Conscience Collective, an effort to address the harm caused by the historical criminalization of cannabis. She was once on the City Club stage debating in a very close election for state representative, and I hope she'll be back. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Phillip Robbins and our panelists.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to the participants and the voters here with us today. To open our debate, each side will have 90 seconds for a statement. Once the opening statements have concluded, we'll move on to questions. We're doing this debate just a little differently from other debates, to give you a heads up. We have prepared a set of questions written specifically for each side. We'll alternate sides, asking one prepared question and then giving that side 60 seconds to answer. Once their time is up, the other side will get 60 seconds to respond to what they've heard from their opponents. Questions were collaboratively developed by City Club's community, and no questions were shared in advance with the participants. When I've completed my prepared questions, each side will then have the opportunity to give a 90-second closing statement. Once closing statements are complete, I will invite a City Club representative to the podium to share the City Club Research Committee's recommendation on Measure 26201. Then we'll move to audience questions via note cards. We won't be taking questions at the microphone today, so if at any time during the debate you have a question, please write it down and hold it high in the air so that a City Club staff member can collect it. Each side will have 45 seconds to answer each audience question. All of you in the room today, we are glad you are here, and we're excited that you're excited, but please refrain from clapping during the debate. It's important that our broadcast audience hears from both sides without any interruptions. But if something catches your attention and you simply must emote, please snap in the air. The participants and all of you should know that if either side goes past the allotted time, their microphone will be turned off. It's so rude but necessary, and the discussion will move on. We flipped a coin to determine who will begin their opening remarks first, and supporters, you've won the coin toss. So please begin.
All right, thank you. This election, we have the opportunity to address two of the most pressing issues of our time: climate change and economic inequality. 2 weeks ago, the UN report on climate change came out with a dire prediction. We have just 12 years to avoid global climate catastrophe. Yet at the same time, the federal government is rolling back critical environmental protections. And every day here in Portland, we see the impact of economic inequality as families struggle to make ends meet, pay the rent. In the midst of an economic boom, too many workers have been left behind, and these are the very communities that have the fewest resources to adapt to the challenges of climate change. We have the opportunity to take local action and address these issues by passing the Portland Clean Energy Initiative to generate much-needed revenue for local solutions. And we can do this by making sure that corporations who just received historic tax cuts pay their fair share. We hope that you will stand with over 200 endorsers who know Portland's communities best and represent their interests. The City Club report, adopted by the membership, said it well. A yes vote is an investment for economic investment that lifts all communities and positions Portland as an environmental leader in the global struggle to end climate change.
Thank you.
That was snappy. Thank you so much. It is really a pleasure to be here to all of you, to the members of the Alliance. I'm here on behalf of the Keep Portland Affordable campaign, and to the proponents, to both Tony, to Jenny. We have shared a stage in many ways over and over again. I'm grateful for the opportunity to debate the issues. And while we agree on so much of what the proponents of this measure are advancing, about climate change science, it's real. About climate change action, it is necessary. We share these noble goals, and we agree on that. Where we are divergent, and I want to be absolutely clear, because the Alliance, its 1,900 members, and businesses across this great region have been very consistent on this point. A gross receipts tax is unequivocally a consumer tax. It is passed on to your neighbors. It is a regressive tax. And what the choice is very clearly at this election, to put this to all of you, this is not a tax on big corporations. It is not a choice between the big companies out there on Wall Street. Look to your left and look to your right. These are your neighbors. They will bear the burden of this tax every single day. $166 may not be a lot to some, but it is to others, and this region's affordability is at a crisis point. So make the choice to support your neighbors this election by protecting them from a regressive consumer tax.
Thank you. Now we're going to move to our prepared questions. We'll alternate who answers first, with the first question going to the proponents. So each side has shared why you are supporting this measure. Please tell us who you are primarily representing in this effort and the top 2 or 3 endorsements you're most proud of. Also, please share who your top 2 or 3 donors are.
Thank you, Roberta. And on behalf of the over 200 organizations representing the Portland Clean Energy Initiative, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Tony DeFalco. I work for Verde. And I think, what I would say I'm most proud of in terms of our endorsements are 2. One is the Business for a Better Portland. This, for all of you that aren't familiar with, is a progressive business alliance here in Portland, and I think it's truly ear to the ground, representing small businesses, progressive businesses, and those that want to address some of the challenges we face, like climate change and income inequality. I think the other one is a collective. That this is endorsed by all of the community of color serving organizations in our town. And that represents what is effectively a new progressive majority that we are building here. And for donors, I would say that our biggest donors are those collective organizations in kind putting toward this campaign, literally hundreds of hours from community organizations to this campaign.
Thank you, Tony. Same question.
Sure. We're very grateful for the endorsement of the Willamette Week editorial board that came out with a very clear perspective on this policy and on what the proponents are putting on the ballot. It was clear it shared the same perspective as Measure 97 did, which was a statewide gross receipts tax, and unequivocally shared the point of view that this will impact consumers, is regressive, and hurts your neighbors. And I would say the other endorsement is the city's Revenue Bureau, which came out with a clear report that reinforced this issue. I know that sounds strange to say, but having city tax experts coming out and pointing out the facts and the science behind this and saying that most of this tax will be passed on to consumers is a strong statement, and we concur, and we want everyone to read that report because that's the city's own report. Our donors come from small businesses up to big businesses, including ourselves. The Alliance is also contributing to this campaign, and we're proud to do so.
Andrew, could you answer the last part of the question? Who are your top 2 or 3 donors?
Top 2 or 3 donors would be the OBI, which is the statewide chamber, contributed a large portion of their resources to this campaign.
Okay. Thank you. So question for the supporters. Transportation is the biggest source of carbon emissions in Oregon. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, low-income families spend at least twice as much of their income on automobiles as they do on all home energy costs. Why have a measure about fighting climate disruption and helping low-income people that gives $0 to improving transit and bike or pedestrian infrastructure, which would both reduce emissions and let people avoid spending lots of money on cars?
Thank you, Roberta. So I'd like to share that our coalition is very dedicated through our individual organizations' work and our collective work in other arenas to improving transportation opportunity. And that ranges from reducing emissions so that our children have healthy air to breathe, to increasing access to public transit and making sure that families simply have the resources to make ends meet. The amount of resources that we're talking about here annually is $30 million. And when we think about things like the state transportation package or the proposed TriMet bond, they are at a completely different magnitude. These resources we prioritize to fund programs where we can have a deep impact, transform the lives of workers and families, and have our dollars go the furthest by putting them where they are needed the most. So we will continue to be active on transportation issues, but this fund is dedicated for renewable energy and good green jobs.
Thank you. Any response from the opponent side?
Well, and one of the issues, I think you hit on a key point, is there's not really much of a nexus between the revenue being raised and what's being spent. One of the principles of public finance is that there should be a nexus. For example, we use gas taxes to pay for roads. We use tobacco taxes to pay for smoking cessation programs. There's not a real nexus here between retail sales and climate change and climate initiatives. In fact, if you look at some of the larger retailers, if you look at per unit of sales, per unit of output, per unit of delivery, they actually have lower carbon emissions per unit than some of the smaller retailers. They've done some of the most work in trying to reduce their carbon footprint because they have the resources to do so. So it's not entirely clear why we are unnecessarily taxing or punishing these larger retailers for doing something they're actually working very hard to reduce.
Thank you. This question is for the opponent side. You object that this tax is regressive. Instead of this tax, would you support a 2% income tax on incomes over $250,000 to pay for renewable energy investments?
I really appreciate that question. So first off, everyone should know that when you look at your utility bills every single month, you'll see a 3% surcharge on gas and you'll see a 6% surcharge on electricity. And this currently goes to fund something known as the Energy Trust of Oregon, which delivers on many of the same initiatives that this proposal is putting on the table, including energy efficiency and job training. So currently, everyone in this room and everybody watching at home is currently funding the exact same programs. What this initiative does is double tax Portlanders. Now, one thing I want to be clear about, the Energy Trust of Oregon has problems, and it needs to be reformed, and we can do that together, and I will reiterate that both the proponents and us would be a great team to reform it and deliver on the promises that we're striving to do here. And I would add, we would be open to any consideration of new tax. The proponents did a benefit analysis, but never did a cost analysis, and that's the issue here.
Thank you. Any response?
Yes. So this is not going to have a regressive impact. And the analysis that Andrew's referring to is filled with gaps and is incomplete in terms of the benefit that utility savings and good jobs are going to have for our community. This initiative is going to provide us with an economic boost. On the issue of the Energy Trust of Oregon, to explain a little bit and try to do this quickly, it's wonky, but the Energy Trust of Oregon is designed to make major reforms that provide systems-wide savings to all ratepayers. We've worked extensively with the Citizens Utility Board, who has endorsed, and they found that if we divert the resources as the Energy Trust is currently being used, we will actually bring up costs for all ratepayers, and that is what's regressive. We have an opportunity to adopt true community-driven solutions that will make a difference in families' lives, and something that is not being met. We don't have enough resources elsewhere.
Thank you. Great job on snapping people in the room. Question for the supporters. You exempt all groceries and devote some money to local food production, but food production is responsible for only 8% of American carbon emissions, while transporting food is responsible for only 1%. Some foods like beef are very high, they have a high carbon footprint, while others like lentils, for instance, are more energy efficient. Instead of exempting all groceries, why not tax big footprint items like beef and use the money to subsidize the purchase of foods with a smaller carbon footprint?
Thank you, Roberta, for the question. So, this is actually a very exciting provision in the Portland Clean Energy Initiative. So in addition to providing revenues that focus on the needs and priorities of low-income people and people of color for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and for workforce and job creation and job training, and for minority and women contracting, it also creates a resource, roughly $4 million a year, for regenerative agriculture. And for those of you that work out in communities every day, you know that both the opportunity to eat healthy food is increasingly expensive, and the opportunity to grow your own food is increasingly available to only those with resources to do so. And so, I've worked with the Mudbone Grown Collaborative out in the neighborhood I work in. And for example, a group of African Americans that are working to bring local food to the African American community in our city. They need more resources to be able to do that, reduces carbon emissions, reduces reliance on food from out of state.
Opponents, would you like to respond?
Well, we wish they would have exempted everything that we buy here in Portland. So I would say we wish they would also have exempted school supplies. We wish they would have exempted school clothing that you put your children in. We wish they would have exempted basic supplies for your home, things that people strive to get into their houses every day. We wish it was all exempt. We wish we could have worked together to appropriately resource the Energy Trust of Oregon. Great point. We agree. We wish all the items that people will be buying every single day of their lives were totally exempt from this. We don't support a regressive tax, and I'll just read from you from the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy, funded by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which said, and I'll quote, "Gross receipts tax," this is the title of the report, "a counterproductive approach to addressing tax regressivity. This tax hurts the poorest among us. It's the most basic services that we use every day. Stand on the side of your neighbors and fight back against the affordability crisis. This is the moment to do it."
Thank you. Question for the opponent side. So would you agree that since climate disruption is an existential threat to humanity as well as other species, it would be wise to support proposals that help to reduce carbon emissions, even if those measures might be flawed?
Absolutely. So absolutely, climate change is a sign of our time. We share that space with the proponents of this measure. They are doing good work. The work of these two organizations are real, and they deliver on good promises to communities that need assistance. You always have to weigh in every single conversation the cost and the benefit, and that's what's missing from this conversation. The benefits they've laid out are true and they are real, and we will acknowledge that. The costs are overwhelming. We do have to find a way to find a more progressive approach to funding climate change. And I tell you this, we are at the table with the governor's office, the state legislator, on addressing these issues on a statewide basis, which I think is absolutely necessary. And we will continue to be, and we have to make very serious considerations about the cost to this. Everyone should consider these factors. So I'll say this, yes, we'd absolutely consider something, but not at the expense of the poorest among us. I will repeat that.
Any response?
Thanks, Roberta. So yeah, I think, I'll point again to the endorsers of this measure, and every community of color serving organization is endorsing this. Every affordable housing provider is endorsing this. Every organization that supports low-income people, people of color, workforce development, organized labor are all supporting this measure. It would be, that's a broad coalition that this city has never seen, this state has never seen. This is the first time that you've seen this very broad mainstream environmental organizations, community of color serving organizations, organized labor, churches, neighborhood associations, all coming together and saying, we can come together and solve two of these intractable problems of our society, and not on the backs of low-income people and people of color who have borne the brunt of the fossil fuel economy for far, far too long.
Thank you. The next question is for supporters. There is a real possibility that consumers will pay for this measure. Do you have any evidence that national chains will not raise prices in Portland as a result of this measure? Do you know if the costs will be incorporated into corporations' national pricing structure?
So this surcharge, this kind of small, narrowly targeted municipal surcharge, has no evidence that there is an impact on prices. Looking to empirical examples, the opposition has not been able to present any. When they refer to gross receipts taxes or what think tanks say, they're talking about very different kinds of structures, very distinct from this surcharge, which is narrowly tailored to impact only the biggest corporations with over $1 billion in national revenue and 500,000 based here in Portland. What this initiative is going to do is it is going to actually stimulate our local economy through utility savings, living wage jobs, and renewable energy. This means that more money will be spent at the very corporations who are subject to this tax and local businesses.
This measure is a gross receipts tax, and the city evaluated this measure back when it was in its infancy. And in the city itself, the Office of Management and Finance said, quote, "Some businesses will partially or wholly pass the GRT, gross receipts tax, on to consumers in the form of price increases." Now, you may not believe the city of Portland. New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, has a gross receipts tax that looks a lot like this one. And their Revenue Bureau says, although the gross receipts tax is imposed on businesses, it is common for a business to pass the gross receipts on to the purchaser either by separately stating it on the invoice, that's the sales tax line, or combining the tax with the selling price. If you go online and try to buy something, say in New Mexico, and ask for in-store pickup, check out the checkout line. It will have a line item that has that gross receipts tax. It would be impossible for them not to pass that on to consumers. And that's why it's going to cost about $166 per family, per household, and it's going to be distributed in such a way that the poorest will be paying about 5 times more as a share of their income than the richest households.
Thank you. For our radio audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Roberta Phillip Robbins, Chair of the Oregon Council on Civil Rights. Today we're hearing from supporters and opponents of Measure 26201, the Portland Clean Energy Initiative, on this November's ballot. On the yes side, we have Tony DeFalco, the Executive Director of Verde, and Jenny Lee, Advocacy Director of the Coalition of Communities of Color. On the no side, we have Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, and Eric Fruits, President of Economics International Corp. The next question goes to our opponents on the measure. To reduce carbon emissions, do you support reducing the number of street lanes devoted to car traffic and creating more bike lanes in Portland generally, and better sidewalk infrastructure in East County specifically?
That's it. Does the alliance or the campaign? So I can't speak for the campaign because we're here to keep Portland affordable. In terms of reducing emissions, first off, I'm a biker. I commute to work on my bike almost half the time. I take a car, and I also take mass transit. Actually, we support every single modality to deal with the fact that this city is moving towards 3 million people in a near decade, which I think is at the root of all of this. So when you're talking transit and transportation, yes, we need to employ everything in our resources available to combat climate change by using different modalities, not at the expense of the affordability of this city. And I want to go back to that because transportation is a wholly different subject, but we would be open to any conversation around removing lanes. And I would even say stay tuned, not to prevaricate, but next week you'll be hearing from us on this issue.
Thank you. Any response?
Sure. Just a brief thought is that, what we don't have in our city is a resource that's available for smart investments in community-led efforts around climate that create jobs, create economic activity, to complement investments in infrastructure like transportation, like affordable housing. And we certainly are hard at work in creating that resource right here, right now, and we have an opportunity to do something. And I would just share that, Portland has been a leader for a long time in climate. We were the first local government to pass a climate action plan, for example, but we've lagged behind on equity. And I think that you see that in the lack of investments out in our neighborhoods, and where I work in Coley, where a lot of us work in East County, and as we get pushed to the margins more and more, and our transportation for people of color and low-income people gets more and more challenging. We need to match those investments with climate investments, and this allows us to do that.
Thank you. Question for the supporter side. The measure provides money for job training. What jobs are you going to train people for? And are they all clean energy jobs? Have you calculated how many jobs you will create at what wages per $1 million spent on training?
Thank you for that question, Roberta. And to tell it to you very plainly, this is the part I'm very excited about because our organization works very hard and have worked hard for the last 13 years to create good paying green jobs. And I'll be honest with you, it's a really challenging thing to do. We operate social enterprises that provide living wages for low-income people, people of color. We provide 80 hours of paid training for those employees every year, and we provide full health dental, and medical every year. And there are many of our colleagues that are doing that across the city. And our organized labor friends are creating good paying jobs and making sure that more women and people of color are getting into those jobs. This creates a resource that those collective entities can innovatively apply to matching up how we address our climate crisis with these good paying opportunities like energy efficiency, renewable energy, and so on, because we have very little resource to be able to do that in our city and our state.
Yeah, but one of the things we got to remember is that everyone will be paying these sales taxes. The poorest households, the richest households. Even if we had all the benefits going to the lowest income households, and all that money went to the lowest income households, none of it went to the upper income households, you would have about, based on the cost of some of these programs, you would serve less than 1% of those low-income household and communities, which means that even though they're going to be paying about $166 more a year in taxes, a lot of them, 99% of them, will actually see no monetary benefits from the programs. And so, again, you get to this kind of fundamental inequity where very few people are going to benefit from it, but everyone is going to be paying for it.
Thank you. This question is for the opponent side. Would the PBA and the campaign, the no side of this campaign, support a carbon tax, putting some money into transit and renewable energy and some into income tax cuts for low and middle income families?
So a conversation around reorienting the tax structure is a good question. First off, I will repeat that we actually are at the table conversing with the governor's office on climate change investment. So cap and invest and having those real dialogues. And they're doing it with business, which I think was really critical here. This measure, it was not done with business, and it was not done to clearly explain to all the communities who have signed on to this, who all heard the side of what the benefits were. They did not discuss the cost. I would endorse any conversation to be around any tax or any form of revenue collection to combat climate change that was not done in a regressive manner and not done on the backs of those that could least afford to do it. So absolutely, we would be open. Who wouldn't be open? It's the right thing to do. Climate change is real. So is tax policy. So is a gross receipts a regressive tax. So let's just deal with realities. And we would be supportive, and we would acknowledge any opportunity to do so in a progressive way.
Thank you. Response?
So I'd first like to say that for those of us who have worked on environmental justice issues, it has been a significant challenge bringing business to the table, especially the types of large corporations who are on the board of business and chambers of commerce, and those who are donating to the opposition campaign. So we absolutely do believe it is important. We must address carbon emissions. This is a crisis, and we want bold action at the local level, like the Portland Clean Energy Initiative, to complement state and national policies to address carbon emissions. On the issue of the cost impact, there simply isn't empirical evidence. You'll hear them refer to science, but science involves empirical testing. I'd also like to note that the report has been authored that they're referring to by someone who's written for ALEC and the Cascade Policy Institute and virtually opposes all taxes that are progressive.
Thank you. A question for the supporter side. What percentage reduction in Portland's carbon emissions do you expect to see in 10 years as a result of this measure?
Thanks for the question, Roberta. So this is, Portland, again, in a lead role. And what I would share is that Portland and Multnomah County have adopted very aggressive climate goals, that we are to achieve 100% renewable energy in our city and our county by 2035. And that's a short time period. It's the time we need to do it in because we need to be aggressive about addressing climate, and yet there's very little resource to be able to do it. And so what we're proposing here is to accelerate that pathway and to follow what the city adopted in its resolution to resource low-income and people of color communities so that they may lead the way in showing us how to lift all boats. I want to make it clear, this lifts all boats. This is getting the climate to get better for all of us and focusing on the needs and priorities of those that have been left out. So we're achieving this very aggressive goal. We're reasserting our place as leaders. We're leading not just on sustainability and climate, but on equity as well.
Thank you. Response?
Sure. So to be clear, where I see Portland in 10 years is a deep concern. Where the affordability crisis is raging, this does not prevent it. Where we see a homelessness crisis on our streets every single day, this does not address it. Where we see issues of congestion and transportation affecting every one of our neighbors, this does not address it. Where we look around and see real issues hurting our city and impacting the region as we continually become more and more unaffordable, this does not address it. This prioritizes a very few over a very many, and to do so in a very regressive way. And I would say that fundamentally I am concerned that we will look back in 10 years and say, what happened to Portland? How did it get even more expensive? How did it get even more impacted by the affordability crisis? How did more people wind up on the streets? How did more people wind up addicted to chemicals, alcohol? How did that happen? And we can say we are diverting resources from those critical needs here.
Thank you. Question for the opponent's side, our last question. How much of the annual budget of the average Portland Business Alliance member goes to job training for people of color, people with disabilities, or chronically unemployed people and women?
That's a great question. So I am proud to represent 1,900 businesses, and to be clear, they are the employer community. They employ thousands of people. They invest every single day in their employees? That's a great question. I am proud to represent the people that produce jobs in this region. They give opportunity. They give middle-class wages to people. And 80% of our members are small businesses, so they are investing in their communities. Brick-and-mortar stores, the places that you shop, the places that you affiliate with, your coffee, your latte, your roller skates, whatever you might want to call it. I would say our businesses invest in job training because their employees are the ultimate fuel that drives their success. And they do a great job of it. The workforce of the Portland community is fantastic. Downtown is going to be hitting record levels of employment, and the investments in your employees is what a good employer does. We do it at the Alliance, and all of our businesses do it too, and we're grateful for that. So we're proud to represent the employer community. Answer the question. I think I just thoroughly did.
I will ask the supporters a different question. What do you think are the 5 companies most likely to pay this tax?
So the information from the Revenue Bureau is proprietary as to which companies would be assessed a fee surcharge. And we know it's about 100. And I want to return to one of the statements our opponents made, and that is this Revenue Bureau report. To be clear, the City of Portland's Revenue Bureau has not endorsed or opposed this measure. They have written a report in June of 2017 that looked at the range associated with assessing a fee increase. Now, what I do want to highlight for you here are 2 things. One, the City Club has endorsed this measure. So City Club members, and I am one, we have endorsed this measure. 2 is that Van Jones recently called this the most important ballot measure in the country this year. And I just want to highlight one of the key endorsers is Speaker of the House, Tina Kotek, has also endorsed this measure. So key leaders on climate and tax say yes to this measure.
Thank you. Now we'll move to closing statements. Thank you for taking time to answer these questions, panelists. Each side will have 90 seconds, and supporters will go first.
Thank you, Roberta. So, and I realized I didn't name some companies there. I'm happy to name some companies. I think we know who they are because they've started to contribute to the opposition. So they include Walmart, they include Comcast, they include Amazon, and Kroger, for example. And what I would say, that we need to focus on here as a community is first and foremost that we need to come together to aggressively confront the challenge in front of us. And we need to do it in a way that puts the communities that have been experiencing the brunt of this for so long in front. And that's what the Portland Clean Energy Initiative is. It's people of color leading the way and saying, we want to see the climate improved, We want to address income inequality, and we can do that by creating jobs, creating economic activity locally, because an energy efficiency project, you can't do that, you can't outsource that. That has to be installed by a local worker with local knowledge, and that money is going to stay in our community. Fundamentally, this is about justice. And I want to make sure that we're focusing on an overarching issue here that for too long, the climate and income have not come to communities of color and low-income communities in our city and in our state. And this starts to move us toward a redistribution of that benefit, of those resources, and who gets to breathe clean air, who gets clean water, who gets access to good transportation, and who gets access to good paying jobs. And that's what the Clean Energy Initiative starts us on a road toward.
Closing statements from the opponent side.
Thank you. First off, thank you to this audience. Most importantly, democracy matters. Everyone should vote. Thank you to the proponents of this for engaging in good debate. And we're grateful for the opportunity to present the issues and to be here on a stage and have all of you listen. It matters. So please vote. I would say that the choice is absolutely crystal clear from our perspective. This is not a choice of taking it to big companies. This is not a choice of taking it to Wall Street. This is about your neighbors. If you don't believe us, do your research. Follow your hearts and find out what a gross receipts tax is. I put it to all of you, and I encourage you to do so. We believe the evidence is clear. We presented our evidence. We truly wish that the proponents of this measure would not have only talked about the benefits and presented what those costs might be. And let people make a clear decision about that. That's the absolute most important thing, is having all the facts on the tables. The reality is, as we grow in population, the city will become more unaffordable. As we grow in population, more and more challenges will hit our streets every day when it comes to the cost of everything, basic consumer goods. So you really have to ask yourself the question, does this align ourselves with the affordability of this city? And it does not. It is regressive. That is irrefutable. So look to your neighbor and know the choice is between them or this measure. And I want to thank all of you for being here today and grateful for the opportunity to be here with you.
Thank you to both sides of this issue for showing up and responding to our questions. We will get to audience questions in a moment, but first, we'll hear from Ashley Denton, a member of the City Club's Measure 26201 Research Committee, who will deliver City Club's report and recommendation. Ashley?
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists. I think that your vibrant conversation really mirrors a lot of the work that we did as well in engaging with this topic. So in January of 2018, a coalition of environmental and social justice groups filed an initiative petition with the City of Portland to enact a corporate revenue surcharge on large retailers to fund projects that will address the city's needs of renewable energy, energy efficiency, green job training, and energy-efficient housing for Portland's most vulnerable populations. This initiative, as it is written, would apply a 1% surcharge on gross revenues of large retailers with more than $1 billion of sales nationally and more than $500,000 of sales within the city of Portland. Sources among communities of color and low-income communities. During our research, we also found that many opponents support the need to address climate change, but assert that the Portland Clean Energy Initiative is an inappropriate way to go about it. They argue that the plan is relatively cost inefficient and poorly planned. Opponents also believe that a 1% surcharge is excessive given the existence of other programs that already address Portland's renewable energy goals and the current taxes that are devoted to existing energy efficiency programs. Finally, opponents argue that the corporate surcharge would be passed on to consumers in increased prices for goods and services, making it no different than a sales tax. This summer, your committee, including Lauren Naldoza, Kath Hart, Paul Milius, and myself, gathered relevant documents, articles, and witness testimony to evaluate the claims of both sides. After assessing the relevant literature and expert testimony, we believe that the provisions in the measure to create an oversight committee and require regular audits will provide us sufficient management controls. Additionally, we see no conflict with other existing or proposed programs that address renewable energy equity or climate change. In fact, your committee believes that the Portland Clean Energy Fund would nicely augment the existing programs or proposals that pursue similar environmental action. We found that current research is either inconclusive or does not support the claim that a relatively small corporate surcharge, such as 1% on large businesses, would negatively affect capital formation, prices, or wages. We believe that the Portland Clean Energy Initiative is not sufficient by itself to meet the goals of the 2015 Portland Climate Action Plan, and we understand that this fund builds the basis by which the future investments will be able to meet these goals. Based on the above findings, our report recommends that you vote yes on the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Initiative, mouthful. In August, City Club of Portland members voted to adopt our research and its recommendation by 77%. I would like to thank all City Club members for making it possible for our committee to conduct this research and for participating in the voting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. For our radio audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Roberta Phillip Robbins, Chair of the Oregon Council on Civil Rights. Today we're hearing from supporters and opponents of Measure 26201, the Portland Clean Energy Initiative, on this November's ballot. On the yes side, we have Tony DeFalco, the Executive Director of Verde, and Jenny Lee, Advocacy Director for the Coalition of Communities of Color. On the no side, we have Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, and Eric Fruits, President of Economics International Corp. Now let's go to the audience for questions. Everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. We will not be taking questions at the microphone today, but instead, if you've written a question on an index card, hold it high for City Club staff to collect. You may also submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FridayForum. Candidates, you will each have 45 seconds for public questions. And our first question is from our Civics Scholars Group, Roosevelt High School. Thank you for the good penmanship. If the Clean Energy Initiative is believed to impact the communities it's supposed to help negatively, what would be an alternative to the measure for the battle on climate change? For opponents.
Thank you, Roosevelt. So I would say very clearly there are options. Right now, the state has a program, the Energy Trust, which the proponents of this measure say is unresourced or needs more resource, and say needs reformation at least, because it's not delivering on the promises of the measure that they're proposing. So what we would say is we should work together, the proponents of this measure and us, business, labor, environmental groups, to reform the Energy Trust of Oregon, properly resource it, and make sure that it has the flexibility to meet the needs of job training, energy efficiency programs that are promised in this initiative. I think we would be, we're a fierce group apart, we would be an even fiercer group together.
Any response?
Sorry. Okay. Hi again. So again, we need to emphasize that the Energy Trust of Oregon does not serve the same purpose. It is designed to provide savings to ratepayers across the board, regardless of income. If we increase the public purpose charge, that is going to hurt low-income families. We know that we do absolutely need additional resources to do the kind of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and job training projects that we hope to achieve. But that's not the purpose of the Energy Trust. Portland Clean Energy Initiative is about the co-benefits to generate good green jobs, give families healthier homes, and help them save on their utilities.
Thank you. I'll direct this question to supporters. What are the impacts to the local economy when low-income households spend less money on electricity to heat their homes?
Sure, that's great. Thank you. And I've had the privilege of sitting alongside someone in the audience here today, Tom Kelly of Neil Kelly, and we recently were at an editorial board visit. And one of the stories that Tom shared was really powerful for me, and it was his experience in installing, through his company, energy efficiency measures for a low-income family. And what he shared then, and I'll share now, is that it makes a big difference. Not only are we talking about safety of low-income homeowners in their homes in terms of weatherizing, but if it's $30, $40, $50, $60 a month in savings on a $300 energy utility bill, that's a big deal. And for many of us in this room, we don't have to think about turning on the thermostat at night to stay warm, but when you have to think about that in the context of that big energy bill and having a reduction, that's a big change.
This question, and I have to say there are many, many questions. This question is directed to Mr. Fruits. You are a frequent contributor to the Cascade Policy Institute, a libertarian think tank that pushes a right-wing climate-denying agenda for Oregon. You yourself have used climate-denying language. Do you believe that the wealthiest corporations that are contributing to the problem should be paying their fair share to those who are most impacted by climate change?
Wow. I only get 45 seconds. I'm actually not employed by Cascade Policy Institute, and I have no idea how much money they get, or how much money they have, or who their donors are. I can't even respond to the other parts of the question.
Okay, thank you. I'll direct this question to supporters. What kind of hard economic research exists on how much money will be raised and how many jobs will be created?
So the unique thing about the Portland Clean Energy Initiative is that it prioritizes community-driven solutions. Those low-income Portlanders have been left out far too long in decision-making and policy-making at the City of Portland, at the state, and nationally. So this is an opportunity to generate revenue by making wealthy corporations pay their fair share to fund solutions that come from the organizations and the people who know these communities best. At the Coalition of Communities of Color, we believe that the best solutions, those that are going to be the most effective, are those that come from within communities. And we also know that those are going to provide the most benefits to all of us and create a more prosperous city.
Thank you. A question directed to Andrew of the Portland Business Alliance. How many of your members who will pay this tax are headquartered in Portland?
I could not answer how many are headquartered here. What I can say is that all the businesses that qualify will pay the tax immediately, and they will pass that on to their consumers. And I can say then also that every single day, Portlanders will be paying this tax over the course of a year, $166 worth passed on. And it's important to note, this is a really critical issue. Everyone thinks this is just impacting consumers. Well, consumers are actually also small businesses. So if you're a small business, you're a consumer too. So you're buying services like banking and marketing and accounting and equipment. Those businesses will pay that also. So I'd say it's not just the headquarters, it's mom and pop on the street that will shoulder the burden of this tax.
Thank you. The next question for supporters. Is a 1% surcharge on certain retailers with more than $1 billion in national sales the best funding mechanism for this kind of initiative?
Sure, thanks, Roberta. And, I think it's important to look at the big picture here. We know that corporations in this country got a huge tax cut in December of 2017. We know that those resources are not being reinvested in our communities. We're not seeing new plants open across the country. We're not seeing investment in the workforce. We're seeing reinvestment in stock purchasing, repurchasing of stock. And so we know that we have to partner. We need to partner together to create the solutions to address these very intractable problems. And what we're asking for is very, very, very modest. 1% from the 1%.
Question to the opponents. In light of the recent UN report on climate change, are existing local programs, such as those administered by the Energy Trust of Oregon, sufficient, in your opinion, to address climate change at our local level?
there's not enough that we can do. Climate change is the sign of our time. It is important. It is real. Climate science is exact, and it is something that we share with the opponents on this, or the proponents of this. You want to be the opponents? But we share with them. It's real. We do need to do more. We don't disagree on the very nature and the assumptions of what the proponents are putting on the table here. But what we will reject every single time is something that is regressive in nature. This is not a choice between the 1%. The profit-maximizing companies will simply not sit there and say, oh, we will digest this tax. They will not. They will be able to adapt their prices. That's just their nature. So the reality that this is going against the 1% is not correct. This is on your neighbor to your left and right.
Thank you. Question for supporters. Can you give any precise examples, including names of some of the organizations that you believe will receive funding through this measure?
Sure. So I think, this fund does two things. One, like I've noted for you earlier, it allows us to resume position as leaders in this country around climate. And it does that by unlocking the innovation of organizations that have been doing workforce and job training in our city, that have been doing work on climate. And I want to make it clear that these are nonprofits who can access these funds, that they can work together with businesses, they can work together with governments, and that there are very strong accountability measures in this in the initiative. It has city council checkoff, it has a committee of expertise checkoff, it has an annual audit. So it's a very smart, targeted measure that creates an opportunity for innovation among the many organizations in the city doing this good work.
Thank you. Question from the audience, which we're doing. Why did the opponents of this measure, question for the opponents, send two white men to represent their case against a woman of color and a person of color? And what proportion of your side you would say are people of color, or those to be most impacted?
Well, first off, yes, I am a white man, and I would accept that. And I would not say that it's about going up against anybody, and I reject that question. But I would say this: if you look at our membership and you look at the diversity of the businesses that we represent, that's who you should look to, and I'm proud to represent them. And I would just say that dividing us, I don't have anything against either Jenny or Tony, and I would never frame them in a perspective of race, their color, their sex, gender, or religious affiliation.
Thank you. Another question for the opponents, and we have an overwhelming number of questions for the opponent side, just to have the supporters know. What obligation do companies that would be subject to the surcharge have to reduce carbon emissions and combat global warming and climate change?
Could you
Should I
repeat the first part of that?
yeah.
I'm sorry.
What obligation do companies that would be subject to this surcharge have to reduce climate change and carbon emissions?
Again, I'll be very repetitive, you'll forgive me. I do believe that we as the business community and labor and environmental groups, all Oregonians and really everyone in this country and across the world, should share the burden of climate change. It's real, it's here, it needs to be addressed, and Oregon does lead the way in that matter, and Portland does lead the way in that matter, and I think that's something to be a point in case to be proud of. So I would say that we believe that there is a balance to be struck, and I think that's the important point. I will revert back to this. The benefits are clear. The costs have not been presented, and I would just say that's what the missing element is now. So companies do have their fair share to pay, but just be aware of what the costs are.
Thank you.
And on that note, we are out of time for the day and need to pause the discussion for now. Please join me in thanking our panelists for being here today, and thank you, Steve Novick, for producing today's program.